Each Memorial Day, observed on the last Monday of May, we pause to honor the 1,153,963 American servicemen and women who gave their lives in wars, their courage and sacrifice forever etched in our nation's heart. From the farmers who fought in the American Revolution to the young soldiers in Afghanistan, these brave heroes died believing in America's cause, only to have their lives cut short in conflicts often driven by vague objectives, questionable escalations, or outright futility. The United States has spent $25 trillion in 2025 terms on these wars, with each death costing an average of $21.66 million, a haunting figure that nears $25 million when accounting for economic losses and hidden expenses. This colossal sum, largely borrowed and never paid off since the Revolution, burdens taxpayers with interest payments that have persisted for centuries, contributing to a $34 trillion national debt, soon to climb to $35 trillion. Despite opportunities to seize $1.72 trillion in spoils from defeated nations, which could offset just 7% of war costs, America has recovered nothing. No gold, no resources, no economic gains. The $25 trillion war debt, alongside $10 trillion in non-war spending, fuels an unsustainable financial crisis, worsened by recurring emergencies that seem orchestrated to deepen debt. As war costs have soared, their purpose has faded, leaving America vulnerable to an influx of 50 to 60 million illegal immigrants, partly spurred by refugee crises that profiteers exploit. We mourn these heroes, whose lives were worth far more than the $21.66 million spent to end them, and demand an end to wars and schemes that weaken our nation. A nation's unpaid war debt. The United States has spent $25 trillion in 2025 terms on wars since the American Revolution, covering major conflicts, minor interventions, Cold War defense, veterans care, interest, and indirect costs, according to the Costs of War Project. This massive expenditure, translating to $73,000 per American or $186,000 per household, has been financed through borrowing, taxes, and deficits, driving a $34 trillion national debt that is projected to reach $35 trillion by 2026 to $103,000 per citizen and $269,000 per household. The war debt, largely unpaid since the Revolution, has grown with interest payments, such as $2 trillion projected for post-9/11 wars by 2050, burdening taxpayers for centuries. In 1835, America came closest to clearing its debt, reducing it to $33,733, or $1.1 million in 2025 terms, under President Andrew Jackson, but deficits soon resumed, and the debt has never been zero since. No spoils, gold, oil, or cash, have offset the $25 trillion. Seizing assets like German reparations or Iraqi oil could have recovered $1.72 trillion, covering only 7% of costs and lowering the debt to $32.28 trillion, but America prioritized rebuilding over plunder, leaving taxpayers with the full burden. How wars are financed. The $25 trillion war cost, not budgeted in advance, is covered through borrowing, taxes, deficits, and money printing, each deepening the national debt. The government borrows through treasury bonds, purchased by banks like JP Morgan at 2 to 5% interest and by nations like China and Japan, each holding $1 trillion in U.S. debt, adding $2 trillion in interest for post-9/11 wars by 2050. Taxes, drawn from general revenue or historical war levies like the 92% marginal rate during the Korean War, divert funds from domestic priorities. Annual deficits, reaching $1.7 trillion in 2023, absorb unbudgeted costs, inflating the $34 trillion debt. The Federal Reserve's money printing, through policies like quantitative easing, risks currency devaluation. These methods ensure taxpayers face the cost without returns, as wars produce no tangible assets, leaving the nation indebted. The $10 trillion non-war debt. The $34 trillion debt includes $25 trillion from wars and $10 trillion from non-war spending. Social Security, costing $1.8 trillion per year, and Medicare/Medicaid, at $1.3 trillion per year, total $6 trillion over decades. COVID-19 relief from 2020 to 2021 added $5 trillion for stimulus and loans. The 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act contributed $1.9 trillion to deficits. Domestic programs, including education and infrastructure at $1 trillion per year, account for $2 trillion historically. Crises, such as the 2009 H1N1 response at $10 billion and disaster relief at $500 billion per decade, add $1 trillion. Interest on non-war debt, at $700 billion per year, totals $2 trillion since 2000. These crises, recurring every 10 to 20 years, seem suspiciously timed, fueling corruption and debt with no resolution in sight. Heroes lost, lives unfulfilled. We honor the 1,153,963 American heroes who died, their lives worth far more than the $21.66 million per death. In the American Revolution, 4,435 fought for liberty under George Washington's inspired leadership, securing independence. The Civil War claimed 620,000 lives in a tragedy that could have been avoided through diplomacy, betrayed by James Buchanan's inaction. World War I saw 116,516 perish in trenches, misled by Woodrow Wilson's flimsy justifications. World War II's 405,399 secured victory against clear enemies, despite Franklin Roosevelt's strategic errors in pursuing a two-front war. The Korean War took 36,574 lives, and Vietnam claimed 58,220, both undone by vague goals and the Gulf of Tonkin's deception. Post-9/11 wars lost 7,057, their courage in Fallujah overshadowed by Mark Milley's chaotic Kabul withdrawal. Minor conflicts added 1,000 more. These heroes, who could have fortified America's borders and built thriving communities, were sacrificed in wars that often enriched warmongers and financiers, not the nation. Spoils that never were. America could have seized $1.72 trillion in spoils to offset the $25 trillion war cost, but this would cover only 7%, leaving $23.28 trillion unrecouped. In the American Revolution, costing $3.16 billion, seizing British colonial assets worth $500 million and trade concessions worth $1 billion could have offset 47%. The Civil War, costing $104.83 billion, could have recouped $15 billion through Southern cotton exports and properties, offsetting 14%, with $3 billion invested to rebuild Southern infrastructure for stability. World War I, at $439.07 billion, could have gained $121 billion from German reparations and $10 billion from colonial assets, offsetting 30%, with $8 billion aiding German and Allied recovery. World War II, costing $5.39 trillion, could have secured $1 trillion from German and Japanese assets, oil, and reparations, offsetting 19%, with $25 billion rebuilding stable allies. The Korean War, at $448.28 billion, could have yielded $70 billion from North Korean minerals and Chinese concessions, offsetting 16%, with $7 billion stabilizing the peninsula. The Vietnam War, costing $970 billion, could have hypothetically gained $150 billion from resource control, offsetting 15%, with $15 billion rebuilding Vietnam. Post-9/11 wars, at $4.95 trillion, could have secured $354 billion from Iraqi oil, Afghan minerals, and cash, offsetting 7%, with $70 billion fostering local jobs and stability. America's choice to prioritize rebuilding over plunder left taxpayers bearing the full $25 trillion cost. Wars of diminishing purpose. The American Revolution, costing $3.16 billion, achieved liberty and was fully justified. The Civil War, at $104.83 billion, could have been avoided, yielding only trauma and division. World War II, costing $5.39 trillion, defeated clear enemies but squandered lives in an unnecessary European campaign. Later wars, Korea at $448.28 billion, Vietnam at $970 billion, and post-9/11 wars at $4.95 trillion, lacked clear objectives and ended in stalemates or defeats. Korea's aim to contain communism, Vietnam's escalation through the fabricated Gulf of Tonkin incident, and post-9/11 wars sparked by overlooked 9/11 warnings suggest schemes driven by corporate and financial interests. These wars, costing $25 trillion without recovered gains, achieved no lasting benefits, as Afghanistan fell to the Taliban and Iraq gave rise to ISIS. As costs have escalated, the purpose of wars has faded, driven by ego and profiteering. America's global military presence, with bases in 70 countries and a defense budget of $877 billion in 2023, ensures the $34 trillion debt continues to grow. A nation unsecured. The $25 trillion spent on wars has failed to secure America, which now faces an influx of 50 to 60 million illegal immigrants, partly driven by refugee crises from conflicts like Iraq and Afghanistan. Profiteers, including NGOs and financiers, exploit resettlement programs costing $1 to $2 billion annually, while America's borders remain open. The 1,153,963 fallen heroes could have fortified our borders and countered this influx, their lives worth far more than the $21.66 million spent to end them in wars that weaken the nation. Grief and meager support. Families of fallen U.S. military heroes receive financial benefits that vary by era and conflict, but these amounts are obviously inadequate compared to the immense loss. On average, modern survivors receive $600,000 in 2025 terms, which includes a $100,000 death gratuity and up to $500,000 from service members' group life insurance if the soldier chose maximum coverage. Far less than the $21.66 million cost per death attributed to war spending. During the Vietnam War, benefits were even lower, averaging around $250,000 in today's terms, adjusted for inflation. For Vietnam-era families, the grief of losing a loved one in a conflict with no clear victory is compounded by bureaucratic challenges, such as endless forms, delayed claims, and denials, making an already painful process even harder. These benefits, while meaningful, fail to ease the deep sorrow of lives lost in wars that often brought no lasting national gain. A call to honor, reform, and reclaim America's future. On Memorial Day, we solemnly honor the 1,153,963 American heroes who died in wars, their lives worth far more than the $21.66 million per death within the $25 trillion spent on conflicts, a debt that has remained unpaid since the American Revolution, burdening taxpayers with interest for centuries. This immense sum, largely borrowed and never recouped through spoils, could have been better left unspent, allowing American families to keep the money for their own essential needs, such as housing, education, or building a brighter future. If it had to be spent, it should have been directed toward defending America, securing our borders, and ensuring our national security, preserving the nation as a safe and prosperous homeland. Instead, potential spoils worth $1.72 trillion could have offset just 7% of costs, leaving $23.28 trillion unrecouped, contributing to a $34 trillion national debt set to rise to $35 trillion, driven by wars and $10 trillion in non-war spending on entitlements, crises, and government excess. Later wars, often fueled by warmongers, profiteers, and orchestrated crises like the 2009 H1N1 response or COVID-19 relief, achieved no lasting gains, leaving America indebted and vulnerable to an influx of 50 to 60 million illegal immigrants, many arriving due to refugee crises sparked by these conflicts. The $25 trillion squandered on these wars cost the lives of our heroes and left a legacy of waste, failing to prevent the profiteering that exploits resettlement programs at $1 to $2 billion annually. By choosing diplomacy and strategic restraint, we could have avoided these conflicts, preserving both the money and the lives of our heroes, strengthening America's defenses, and maintaining our nation as it could have been, a secure, thriving homeland without the devastating toll of unnecessary wars. We honor these brave souls by rejecting wasteful wars and crises, ensuring no hero dies in vain, and committing to a future where America thrives, secure, debt-free, and protected from external threats.